An HOA president pushed too far, a homeowner stood her ground, and the showdown that followed left an entire community questioning who really held the power. Imagine waking up before sunrise, stepping onto your porch with a cup of coffee, and seeing the president of your HOA crouched in front of your neighbor's door, hurling raw eggs at the siding like a teenager pulling a prank. That's exactly what happened in a quiet subdivision outside of Overland Park, Kansas. But this wasn't some childish dare. This was personal, and it was mean. The woman doing the egging was Claudine Hensley, a 60-year-old who had built her reputation in the neighborhood as the iron-fisted head of the Homeowners Association. For years, she had issued letters and fines over everything from trash cans left out too long to hedges trimmed an inch too high. Some people quietly complied, others grumbled but paid. But one resident refused to be intimidated. Adrienne Colton, a 43-year-old financial analyst and mother of two. Adrienne's house stood out not because it broke rules, but because it represented quiet resistance. She planted flowers that didn't match the approved color scheme. She fought back against excessive HOA fines. She even attended meetings where she asked questions that others were too nervous to raise. That, for Claudine, was enough to brand her a problem. And so, at 5:45 in the morning, Claudine decided to make her point in a way she thought no one would see. She tiptoed across the lawn with a half-empty carton of eggs. She glanced around, making sure no headlights came down the street. Then, splat! The first egg burst against the wooden door. Inside, Adrienne had already stirred awake. She wasn't sure if it was the soft thud against her door or the faint crack of an eggshell breaking, but something told her to look. She slid her robe over her pajamas, padded barefoot across the hardwood, and peeked through the peephole. What she saw almost didn't register at first. Her HOA president, standing right there, arm cocked back, another egg in hand. Adrienne opened the door just as the egg flew, catching Claudine mid-motion. The egg missed her face by a foot and exploded on the entry mat. "What on earth are you doing?" Adrienne's voice cut sharp against the morning air. Claudine's head jerked up. She froze, shoulders tightening, face burning with the embarrassment of being caught. But instead of apologizing, she lashed out. "You think you're better than everyone else, don't you?" she spat. "Always arguing at meetings, always questioning me. I'm sick of it." Adrienne blinked, stunned. She had expected denial, maybe an excuse. But this? It was raw, bitter honesty. And it dripped from Claudine like venom. "You're egging my house because I planted tulips?" Adrienne said, her tone calm but incredulous. Claudine tightened her grip on the carton. "You're ruining this neighborhood with your attitude. People like you don't belong here." The words hung heavy, and Adrienne knew exactly what Claudine meant. It wasn't just about flowers, or fines, or rules. This was about her, who she was, the way she carried herself, the fact she wouldn't bow down. "Put the eggs down, Claudine," Adrienne said evenly. "This isn't going to go the way you think it will." From across the street, a door creaked open. A neighbor named Gerald Foster, who often left for work early, stepped onto his porch. He squinted at the scene, phone in hand, already recording. Curtains twitched in nearby windows. More eyes were watching now. Claudine's face flushed deeper as she realized she wasn't just caught by Adrienne. She was on display for the whole block. Still, she didn't back away. "You don't scare me," Claudine snapped, voice cracking just slightly. Adrienne's stance shifted. She wasn't threatening, but there was something steady about her posture. Feet grounded, shoulders loose, gaze unblinking. Years of training had wired her body to stay composed in moments of confrontation, though Claudine had no idea of Adrienne's background. "Claudine," Adrienne said softly, "you need to stop now." But Claudine couldn't stop. Something in her pride wouldn't let her. She clutched another egg, hand trembling slightly, the carton rattling as her grip tightened. The moment stretched, quiet but heavy, broken only by the faint hum of Gerald's camera phone. What should have been an embarrassing retreat for Claudine was rapidly turning into a neighborhood spectacle. And the longer she stood there, the more obvious it became that this wasn't just about eggs. It was about power, control, and resentment that had been building for years. But what Claudine didn't know was that Adrienne wasn't the kind of woman you could bully. Not with fines, not with insults, and certainly not with eggs. By the time Adrienne shut her front door that morning to clean up the mess, the damage was already bigger than broken eggs on her mat. The neighborhood had seen something they couldn't unsee. The HOA president, the woman who handed out violation letters like Halloween candy, caught breaking the very rules she forced on everyone else. But to understand why this moment carried so much weight, you have to know the history between Adrienne Colton and Claudine Hensley. Their story didn't begin with yolk dripping down a door frame. It began months earlier in the HOA meeting room inside a community center off Antioch Road. Adrienne had moved to the neighborhood 3 years prior. She was friendly, paid her dues on time, and kept her property tidy. But she wasn't the type to let things slide when something didn't feel right. At her first HOA meeting, she noticed the board imposing fines that didn't make sense. A neighbor had been charged for leaving a child's bicycle on the front lawn for one afternoon. Another family was fined for painting their shutters a slightly different shade of brown than the approved palette. Adrienne raised her hand, politely asked for clarification, and instantly felt the chill in the room. That chill came from Claudine. Claudine had ruled the HOA for over a decade, and to her, every meeting was an opportunity to remind homeowners who held the power. Most people kept their heads down, muttered their complaints in private, and paid whatever fee was slapped on their account. Adrienne, however, wasn't built that way. "I'm sorry, but can someone explain what harm the shutters are causing?" Adrienne had asked during that meeting, her voice clear but respectful. Claudine adjusted her glasses and gave a tight smile. "Rules are rules. If we allow one exception, everything falls apart. But shouldn't rules be reasonable?" Adrienne pressed. Murmurs rippled through the room. Some homeowners glanced down at their agendas, pretending not to hear. Others shifted in their seats, secretly agreeing but unwilling to speak. Claudine's smile thinned. "This is how we maintain property value, Adrienne. If you don't like it, perhaps this isn't the right neighborhood for you." That was the spark. From that day forward, Adrienne became a target. Letters started arriving in her mailbox. First, it was about the flower beds. Her tulips, bright red and yellow, didn't match the HOA's recommended subdued palette. Then it was about her trash can, accused of being left out too long, even though Adrienne had brought it in the same day. Fines piled up, small but steady. Each time, Adrienne filed an appeal. Each time, she pushed back. And each time, Claudine's resentment deepened. Neighbors noticed. Some admired Adrienne's courage. Others whispered warnings. One evening, a man down the block, Philip Danner, leaned against his fence and told her, "You're poking the bear." She doesn't forget things. Adrienne had laughed lightly. Then maybe it's time someone poked her. She's gotten away with too much. Still, the tension grew thick. Claudine had an ability to turn small inconveniences into full-blown scandals. She'd stop residents during their evening walks to scold them about lawn length. She'd send mass emails with passive-aggressive reminders about HOA policies. She even once left a note taped to Adrienne's mailbox, written in neat block letters. "Comply, or reconsider your place here." Adrienne kept her cool. Outwardly, she stayed polite, professional. Inwardly, though, she began to realize Claudine's issue wasn't just about rules. It was personal. And it was escalating. By the time eggs splattered against her door that morning, Adrienne wasn't surprised at the hostility, only at how brazen it had become. What shocked her most wasn't Claudine's anger, but her willingness to act on it in front of everyone. Word spread quickly. By noon, neighbors were already talking. Some pretended to be horrified, others whispered with a hint of satisfaction. For years, they'd endured Claudine's rigid control, and now they saw a crack in her armor. One neighbor, Janice McMillan, recounted later, "It was like watching the queen bee finally get stung." People had been waiting for that moment. Adrienne, however, wasn't interested in revenge or gossip. She wanted accountability. But she also knew something important. This wasn't going to stop with eggs. People like Claudine didn't just admit they were wrong and walk away. Adrienne stood in her kitchen that afternoon, wiping yolk from her door with a rag, when her daughter Kendra asked, Mom, why? I'm going to keep standing up. That's all I can do. But even Adrian couldn't predict how quickly that morning's confrontation would spiral once the videos started spreading beyond the neighborhood. Adrian didn't plan on becoming the center of a neighborhood spectacle that morning. She just wanted to catch whoever was making that strange noise against her door. But the moment she opened it and saw Claudine standing there, carton in hand, the situation transformed. What should have been a quick embarrassment for Claudine turned into an open confrontation. The early morning air was heavy, still carrying the dampness from last night's storm. Puddles dotted the sidewalks, reflecting porch lights. Claudine's face, twisted in frustration, looked almost feral in the pale glow. Adrian tightened the sash of her robe, planting her feet firmly on the porch. "You're egging my house because of flowers? Because I questioned you in a meeting?" Adrian's voice wasn't loud, but it carried authority. Claudine sneered. "Don't play innocent. You've been undermining me for years. Every time I enforce the rules, there you are, challenging me, making me look weak." Adrian tilted her head, studying her. "So, your solution is vandalism?" Claudine took a step closer, egg still in hand. "Someone had to put you in your place. You think the rules don't apply to you because you want to act like you're smarter than everyone else." Adrian's eyes narrowed. "Claudine, this isn't about rules. This is about control. And you've lost yours." From across the street, Gerald Foster raised his phone a little higher, zooming in. His low chuckle could be heard faintly as he muttered, "Gotcha." Another porch light flicked on 2 houses down. Curtains fluttered. Adrienne realized the entire block was waking up to this drama. Still, she kept her composure. "I'm asking you one last time. Put the eggs down." Claudine's hand trembled, but she held her ground. Her pride was too strong to let her retreat. "Or what?" she snapped. "What are you going to do, Adrienne?" Adrienne paused. She didn't want to escalate. She didn't want her daughter, now peeking nervously from behind the curtains, to see violence on their doorstep. But she also wasn't going to let Claudine bully her anymore. "You don't want the answer to that," Adrienne said softly. The quiet confidence in her tone made Claudine falter. She hadn't expected Adrienne to sound so certain, so steady. For years, she had imagined her as a nuisance, a thorn in her side, but not as someone she should actually fear. "Answer me!" Claudine barked, though the crack in her voice betrayed her. Adrienne took one step forward, her posture still relaxed but unshakable. "You think power means screaming and throwing things. That's not power, Claudine. That's desperation." The words seemed to sting more than any punch could have. Claudine's lips quivered, and for a moment she looked like she might retreat. But then, as if remembering the eyes watching from every angle, she doubled down. She hurled the egg in her hand. Adrienne shifted ever so slightly. The egg missed her shoulder and splattered against the siding, dripping down in yellow streaks. "See?" Claudine shouted toward the neighbors. "She thinks she's untouchable." Adrienne's jaw tightened, but her voice stayed calm. "No, Claudine. I just know better than to throw food at someone's house and call it leadership." Gasps and muffled laughs rippled from the few neighbors watching openly now. Someone whispered, "She's making a fool of herself." Claudine's face reddened. She turned to the bystanders, shouting, "You all know I'm right. She's been breaking rules since the day she moved here. If she wins, the neighborhood loses." Adrienne crossed her arms. "If I win?" "This isn't a game, Claudine. This is people's lives, their homes, and you've forgotten that—" The silence that followed was deafening. Even the birds, usually chirping at that hour, seemed muted. Gerald from his porch finally called out, "Claudine, you might want to go home before you make things worse." But Claudine wasn't ready to leave. She stepped onto Adrienne's walkway, closer now, eyes burning with rage. "You don't belong here. People like you never do." Adrienne's heart pounded, but she didn't let it show. Her training had taught her long ago how to master fear, how to stand without flinching. She lowered her voice so only Claudine could hear. "Say whatever you want, but understand this. You will not scare me. You will not break me. And you will not decide who belongs and who doesn't. Claudine's hand twitched as if she might throw another egg, but the carton slipped from her grip and tumbled to the ground. Eggs rolled, but this wasn't the end. If anything, it was only the beginning of something much bigger, because by then, the videos of the standoff were already hitting social media. By sunrise, what began as a petty act of vandalism had turned into the kind of drama suburban neighborhoods whisper about for years. From one end of the cul-de-sac to the other, people peeked out from behind blinds, pressed their faces to the glass, and lifted their phones like they were documenting a prize fight. The HOA president versus the homeowner who wouldn't bend. Gerald Foster, standing firm on his porch, didn't stop recording. His phone captured every second. Claudine with egg yolk on her shoes, Adrienne standing tall and unshaken, the carton spilling across the walkway like a trail of evidence. Gerald had lived there for nearly 20 years, long enough to remember when Claudine first started running the HOA, and long enough to know this was the first time anyone had made her look small. "Claudine, you need to leave," Gerald called out again. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the authority of a man who rarely spoke unless he meant it. Across the street, Janice Macmillan whispered to her husband, "She's finally gone too far. Egging someone's house? That's not leadership. That's childish." Her husband grunted, pulling the curtain shut. "Careful, Janice." You know how she gets when people cross her, but not everyone stayed quiet. 2 houses down, Trevor Green, a younger neighbor who had always disliked the strict HOA rules, stepped onto his lawn, phone in hand. "Hey, Claudine," he called. "Want me to send this video to the news? I hear they love stories about power-hungry HOA presidents." The remark earned a few stifled laughs from other porches. Claudine's head whipped around, her glare landing on Trevor. "Mind your business," she snapped. Trevor smirked. "Oh, it is my business. You fined me $200 last year for having my grill out front for one day. Maybe now people will see who's really breaking the rules." Claudine's cheeks flushed, but she turned back toward Adrienne, determined not to lose focus. "Don't think these people care about you," she hissed. "They'll side with me in the end." Adrienne, still calm, shook her head. "You don't see it, do you? They're already choosing." And it's not you. That line hit Claudine harder than the laughter. Her hands clenched at her sides. She opened her mouth to fire back, but at that moment, another neighbor, Cynthia Lopez, who had been silently recording from her driveway, spoke up. "Claudine, you're embarrassing all of us," Cynthia said. "You claim you're protecting this neighborhood, but you're making it look like a circus." Claudine turned sharply. "You think you could do better? You think any of you could run this place without me?" The collective silence of the neighbors answered for her. Not one voice came to her defense. Adrienne finally broke the pause. "Go home, Claudine. This doesn't end with you screaming in my driveway. It ends with accountability. You know it, I know it, and now they all know it." Gerald's phone caught every word. By then, his video was already being texted to group chats, posted in Facebook groups, and uploaded to TikTok. Within an hour, Adrienne's calm defiance and Claudine's meltdown would be replayed hundreds of times. But in that moment, it was still just a neighborhood caught between silence and spectacle. Claudine, refusing to give in, took one final swing with her words. "You'll regret this. You'll all regret turning on me." Adrienne didn't blink. "The only regret here is yours, because when you decided to cross that line, you showed everyone who you really are." From the sidelines, Trevor let out a low whistle. "She's done," he muttered. Claudine's lips pressed into a thin line. She turned, snatched up the half-empty egg carton, and stormed down the walkway. Eggshells crunched under her shoes. Neighbors tracked her with their eyes as she stomped across the street, shoulders stiff, head high, but dignity shattered. She slammed her front door so hard, the echo carried down the block. Adrienne stood still for a moment, letting her breath steady. Her daughter opened the door a crack, whispering, "Is it over?" Adrienne looked at her, then glanced back at the neighbors who lingered outside, their phones still raised, their faces full of questions. "No," she said quietly. "This is just starting." The neighbors exchanged glances. Some nodded silently, others slipped back inside, unsure of what came next. The hierarchy that had ruled their lives for years had just been shaken, and the aftershocks were only beginning. But Adrienne's calm wasn't an accident. It came from something Claudine didn't know yet, something that would soon shift the balance of power entirely. For most of her neighbors, Adrienne's composure that morning seemed extraordinary. To stand in front of an irate HOA president hurling eggs and insults without flinching, it felt almost superhuman. But for Adrienne, it was second nature. Her calm didn't come from luck. It came from years of discipline, years of training her body and mind to stay grounded under pressure. Back in her kitchen, Adrienne wiped the last streak of yolk from the doorframe. Her daughter Kendra sat at the table, wide-eyed. "Mom," she whispered, "how come you weren't scared?" She looked so mad, Adrienne smiled faintly, rinsing the rag in the sink. "Because I've been in scarier situations than Claudine Hensley with a carton of eggs." Kendra tilted her head. "Like what?" Adrienne leaned against the counter, and for a moment her mind traveled decades back, to a small dojo in Topeka, Kansas, where she'd first tied a white belt around her waist at age 13. Her parents had enrolled her after a neighbor's dog had scared her walking home from school. What started as a way to build confidence had become a lifelong practice. She could still smell the faint pine of the wooden floors, hear the rhythm of the sensei's clap, signaling the start of drills. She remembered the hours of repetition, punches until her knuckles ached, kicks until her legs shook. But more than the physical training, she remembered the lessons drilled into her by Sensei Ota. Power without control is weakness. Control makes strength unshakable. By 16, Adrienne had earned her black belt, not because she was the fastest or the strongest, but because she had mastered patience. She had learned to read her opponent without striking, to wait for openings, to breathe when others panicked. That morning, standing on her porch in her robe, she wasn't thinking about karate forms or self-defense, but her body carried the imprint of all those years. Her feet had planted firmly, her shoulders had stayed relaxed, her voice had remained steady. To the neighbors, it looked like confidence. To Adrienne, it was simply discipline resurfacing when she needed it most. "Karate taught me something Claudine doesn't understand," Adrienne told Kendra softly. "You don't win by yelling louder. You win by keeping control of yourself when everyone else is losing theirs." Kendra looked thoughtful. "So you could have, fought her," Adrienne chuckled. "Yes, but that would have given her exactly what she wanted, a fight she could twist against me. Real strength isn't about throwing punches. It's about knowing when you don't have to." Meanwhile, across the street, Gerald was replaying his footage. His wife leaned over his shoulder, whispering, "She didn't even flinch when Claudine threw that egg." Gerald shook his head. "That's because she's got something the rest of us don't. You can see it in the way she stood. She wasn't scared. She was ready, if it came to it." By mid-morning, snippets of Gerald's video began appearing online. The angle wasn't perfect, but you could see Adrienne standing tall while Claudine flailed with eggs. One clip, uploaded by Trevor Green, had the caption, "HOA President loses it. Neighbor stays calm." Within hours, it had thousands of views. Comments poured in. "Who is that woman in the robe? She looks unshakable. Imagine egging someone's house as HOA president. She needs to resign. Adrienne looks like she could take her down with one hand behind her back." Adrienne ignored the growing chatter at first. She spent the afternoon cleaning her walkway, checking on her kids, and answering calls from co-workers who had already heard rumors of the HOA incident. But she knew it was only a matter of time before the situation escalated beyond neighborhood gossip. Late that evening, her son Jordan asked the question she'd been expecting. "Mom, what happens if she tries again?" "What if she comes back madder than before?" Adrienne rested her hand on his shoulder. "If she does, then I'll be ready. But I won't meet anger with anger. That's not how I was raised, and that's not what karate taught me," Jordan frowned. "But isn't karate about fighting?" Adrienne shook her head gently. "It's about balance. About choosing peace, but being ready if peace isn't an option." The kids didn't fully understand yet, but one day they would. And if Claudine thought intimidation would break her, she had no idea that Adrienne had been preparing her whole life for moments like this. But while Adrienne's discipline kept her steady, Claudine's pride wouldn't let her retreat quietly. And the next HOA meeting would prove just how far she was willing to go. The days following the egging incident felt strangely charged in the neighborhood. People still waved at each other, kids still biked down the sidewalks, sprinklers still ticked across perfect lawns. But under the surface, tension hummed. Conversations at mailboxes turned hushed. Text threads lit up with speculation. Everyone wanted to know what Claudine would do next. Adrienne tried to keep her life normal. She dropped her kids at school, logged into work, even joined her team's morning video calls with a smile. But everywhere she went, she caught the looks. A neighbor pausing mid-step, someone whispering at the grocery store. She realized Gerald's video had spread further than she thought. By Thursday evening, Adrienne knew she couldn't avoid it anymore. The HOA meeting. Held once a month in the community room by the pool, it had always been Claudine's stage. She'd sit at the front with her stack of binders and her gavel, scanning the crowd like a judge in court. Most residents came reluctantly, hoping to avoid being singled out. But that night, the room was full. Adrienne arrived a few minutes early, her son Jordan tagging along just to see the showdown. The low chatter stopped as soon as she walked in. Neighbors shifted in their seats, some smiling at her with quiet admiration, others simply curious. At the front, Claudine sat stiff, papers neatly arranged in front of her. Her smile looked pasted on, her hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly, her knuckles blanched. "Good evening," Claudine began, her voice slightly shaky. "We'll keep tonight's meeting brief. There are a number of items to review, but the room wasn't here for landscaping updates or pool maintenance schedules. Everyone knew what was really on the agenda. Adrienne sat near the middle, hands folded in her lap, calm as ever. She didn't raise her voice, didn't provoke. She simply waited. It didn't take long. 15 minutes into the meeting, Claudine's control cracked. A neighbor asked about the video, whether the HOA had any comment on what happened outside Adrienne's home. Claudine's eyes flashed. "That was a personal matter," she snapped. "It has nothing to do with HOA business." Murmurs rippled through the room. Trevor Green raised his hand but spoke before being called on. "Personal matter? You were standing in Adrienne's driveway throwing eggs at her door. That's not personal, Claudine. That's harassment." The room buzzed with agreement. Claudine slammed her gavel. "Order! This meeting is not about me," Adrienne finally spoke, her voice calm but cutting through the noise. "Then what is it about, Claudine? Because it seems to me the leadership of this HOA is directly tied to how its president behaves." Heads turned toward Adrienne. Her tone wasn't angry. It was measured, almost surgical. Claudine's face reddened. "You've been a thorn in my side since the day you moved here," Claudine blurted, forgetting all pretense. "Always questioning, always pushing. You don't respect authority." Adrienne's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Authority has to earn respect. It doesn't demand it." That line landed like a stone in water, rippling through the crowd. Gerald nodded quietly. Cynthia muttered, "She's right." Claudine's hand trembled as she gripped her gavel again. "If you don't like it here, you can leave. Nobody is forcing you to stay." Adrienne leaned forward slightly, her eyes steady on Claudine. "That's where you're wrong. This is my home. My kids play here, my mortgage is here, my life is here. You don't get to decide who belongs. And you certainly don't get to break the rules you enforce on everyone else." The tension in the room grew thick. Neighbors whispered among themselves, some nodding, some stunned. Claudine's jaw worked furiously, but she couldn't find a response that would silence Adrienne's calm truth. Finally, Trevor spoke up again. "Maybe it's time for a vote. If the president of our HOA thinks egging someone's door is acceptable behavior, maybe she's not the right person for the job." The room erupted in quiet agreement. Murmurs, nods, scattered claps. Claudine banged the gavel again, but the sound felt hollow. Her control was slipping. Adrienne didn't press further. She simply sat back, hands folded again. the very picture of composure. She knew she didn't need to shout or argue. The neighbors had seen enough. That night, the meeting ended in chaos. The days after the heated HOA meeting felt like walking across cracked ice. Everyone in the neighborhood sensed something was about to give. Claudine had lost her grip on the room, but anyone who had lived under her rule long enough knew she wouldn't just fade into the background. Humiliation had only sharpened her anger. Adrienne carried on with her routine, but she could feel the shift. When she watered her garden, neighbors she barely knew stopped to offer quiet encouragement. "We're with you," one whispered. When she jogged past the playground, another parent gave her a subtle thumbs up. Even people who had never spoken to her before seemed to rally around her presence. Claudine, meanwhile, grew more isolated. Curtains that once opened wide when she walked by now stayed drawn. A few loyal friends kept their distance, afraid of being caught in the fallout. But the woman herself refused to retreat. Instead, she plotted. It came to a head one Saturday afternoon. Adrienne was unloading groceries from her car, the warm sun beating down on the driveway, when she heard footsteps quickening behind her. She turned, and there was Claudine, storming across the lawn in broad daylight, face flushed, fists clenched. "You think you've won, don't you?" Claudine barked. Adrienne set down the bag in her hand and faced her squarely. "I don't think this is about winning, Claudine. I think this is about you realizing you can't control people anymore." Claudine stepped closer, invading her space. "You humiliated me in front of the whole neighborhood." "You made me look weak." Adrienne shook her head calmly. "You did that yourself." The confrontation drew immediate attention. Gerald, sitting on his porch with his morning paper, lowered it and stood. Cynthia Lopez, gardening a few houses down, froze with her trowel in midair. Phones came out again, as if the neighbors had learned to expect fireworks whenever these two crossed paths. Claudine's voice grew louder. "You think you're untouchable because people like you always play the victim?" Adrienne's eyes narrowed, her jaw tightening, but her voice stayed even. "This isn't about playing victim. This is about accountability." The words sliced through the air, but Claudine wasn't listening. She raised her hand as if she might shove Adrienne. Gasps rippled across the street. Adrienne shifted her stance subtly, feet braced, shoulders relaxed, eyes fixed. To the untrained eye, it looked like a simple adjustment. To anyone with martial arts training, it was clear. She was ready if Claudine made contact. "Don't," Adrienne said quietly. The single word carried more weight than a scream. Claudine froze. Her hand hung in the air, trembling slightly, before she pulled it back. The neighbors watching exhaled, some muttering in disbelief. Adrienne took a step closer, her voice dropping low so only Claudine could hear. "You want me to lose control. You want me to give you an excuse. But that's not going to happen. Not today. Not ever." Claudine's eyes darted around, realizing how many phones were recording, how many eyes were on her. She backed up a step, her face contorted with a mix of rage and humiliation. "This isn't over," she hissed. Adrienne straightened her posture, calm but unyielding. "It already is. You just don't see it yet." With that, Claudine turned on her heel and stormed off, muttering under her breath. Neighbors exchanged glances, shaking their heads. Some even clapped softly, not for the drama, but for Adrienne's restraint. Adrienne bent down, picked up the grocery bag she'd set aside, and carried it inside. To her kids, she looked the same as ever, steady, collected. But inside, she felt the adrenaline surging. She knew she'd been seconds away from having to physically defend herself. And though she was confident in her ability, she was grateful it hadn't come to that. Later that evening, Gerald knocked on her door. "Adrienne," he said, shifting awkwardly. "I don't usually get involved, but the way you handled her today, that was something. You didn't let her break you." Adrienne offered a tired smile. "She wants me angry. If I lose my temper, she wins." "That's not going to happen," Gerald nodded slowly. "Still, be careful. People like her don't go down easy." Adrienne knew he was right. Claudine's pride had been wounded twice now. Once with eggs, once with an almost altercation. The more she lost control, the more dangerous she became. But the real battle wouldn't play out on driveways or in meetings. It was about to move online, where the whole country would weigh in, and neither Adrienne nor Claudine could predict what came next. By the following Monday, the confrontation in Adrienne's driveway had already gone viral. Gerald's video from the egging incident had spread widely, but this new clip, Claudine raising her hand and Adrienne stopping her cold with a single word, struck a nerve. Within hours, it appeared on Twitter, Reddit, and even local Kansas City news outlets. The captions varied. HOA President loses control. Calm versus chaos. This woman's strength is unreal. Adrienne hadn't asked for any of it. She didn't post the video. She didn't want to be a symbol. But as the days rolled on, her name became shorthand for standing up to abuse of authority. At work, her phone buzzed with texts. A co-worker wrote, "Adrienne, you're trending. Saw you on my feed this morning. Total legend." Her boss called her into a private Zoom, not to scold her, but to ask if she needed time off. Meanwhile, her kids weren't sure what to make of the sudden attention. Jordan came home from school saying, "Mom, people keep asking if you're famous." Kendra admitted she'd seen her mum's face in a TikTok montage with dramatic music playing in the background. Adrienne just sighed. "I'm still me," she told them. Fame doesn't mean anything if it doesn't change something for the better. But across the street, things were different. Claudine's house, once the hub of HOA business, now looked abandoned. Curtains drawn, porch empty. Her car rarely moved. Neighbors whispered she'd been receiving angry calls from residents demanding she step down. Others claimed she'd been reported to the HOA's regional council. Cynthia Lopez recounted to Adrienne one afternoon, "I went by to drop off the meeting minutes, and she didn't even open the door. Just yelled through it that she wasn't speaking to traitors." Adrienne nodded. That sounds like her. Yet Adrienne couldn't ignore a nagging thought. Humiliation doesn't always lead to reflection. Sometimes it hardens people. Claudine wasn't the type to apologize. She was the type to double down, even if it meant burning the whole house down. The neighborhood itself seemed divided. Some neighbors openly voiced support for Adrienne, others kept quiet, afraid of what would happen if Claudine clawed her way back into power. The community Facebook group turned toxic, half praising Adrienne's strength, half insisting she had provoked Claudine. Arguments spilled into the comment threads, neighbors trading insults over HOA policies and personal grievances. One evening, Adrienne scrolled through the posts, frowning at a comment that read, "She's just looking for attention." Probably staged the whole thing. Another read, "If she didn't want trouble, she should have just followed the rules." Jordan looked over her shoulder. "Don't read those, Mom." People are dumb online. Adrienne set her phone down. "It's not about me. It's about what people see when they look at someone standing up to authority. Some will cheer. Others will get angry. Both reactions say more about them than about me." Still, she couldn't shake the weight of it. She'd been trained all her life to stay calm, to control herself. But she hadn't been trained for internet fame, for neighbors who saw her as either a hero or a villain. And then came the knock on her door. It was Gerald again, phone in hand. "Adrienne," he said, "have you seen this?" He handed her the screen. A local news station had just aired a segment featuring clips from both confrontations. The anchor described Adrienne's the homeowner standing firm against a combative HOA president. Claudine's face was blurred, but everyone in the neighborhood knew who it was. Adrienne exhaled slowly. "So, now the whole city knows." Gerald nodded. "Maybe that's not a bad thing. People need to see what happens when power goes unchecked." Adrienne appreciated his words, but she also knew visibility came with risk. Claudine was already unstable in her anger. How much worse would it get now that her humiliation had been broadcast? That night, Adrienne tucked her kids into bed and sat alone at the kitchen table. She thought of her sensei's words, spoken decades earlier. "The hardest opponent you'll ever face is the one who refuses to admit defeat." Adrienne wasn't afraid of Claudine in a physical sense. She knew if it came to that, she could protect herself. What worried her was the unpredictability of pride. A person desperate to salvage their power could do things no one expected. But Adrian also knew this. She wasn't alone anymore. The neighbors had seen too much, the city had taken notice, and silence was no longer an option. The question was, how would the HOA itself respond to the growing storm? When the HOA board called an emergency meeting, everyone knew why. No one mentioned pool repairs, landscaping budgets, or late fees. The elephant in the room was Claudine, and the videos that had painted her as an unhinged president drunk on power. The meeting was held on a Thursday evening inside the community clubhouse, a beige one-story building near the tennis courts. Normally, only a handful of residents showed up, the ones with complaints about parking or noisy teenagers. But that night, nearly every chair was filled. People stood along the back wall, cell phones ready, waiting to see what would happen. Adrian sat near the front, her children at home with a neighbor. She kept her posture relaxed, hands folded in her lap, but her eyes stayed sharp. She wasn't here to grandstand, but she wasn't going to shrink either. At the head table, the other board members, 3 men and 2 women, looked uncomfortable, glancing between Claudine and the restless crowd. Finally, the board secretary, Martin Greer, cleared his throat. "We've received a number of complaints following recent incidents," he began, carefully avoiding Claudine's name. "The purpose of tonight's meeting is to address leadership concerns." A hand shot up in the audience. Trevor Green, never one to hold back. "Let's stop dancing around it. We all saw the videos. Claudine threw eggs at Adrian's house and tried to start a fight in her driveway. How is she still sitting up there?" The room buzzed with murmurs of agreement. Claudine's face flushed as she gripped the table. "That footage was taken out of context," she snapped. "I was provoked." "Adrian has been undermining me for years," Adrian's calm voice carried across the room. "Claudine, I didn't film you. I didn't make you throw eggs or raise your hand to strike me. That was your choice. You're not the victim here." A few claps broke out, quickly silenced by the board's gavel. Martin sighed. "Mrs. Hensley, regardless of context, the behavior shown was unacceptable. The HOA cannot function if residents lose faith in their leadership." Claudine's voice cracked. "So what, you're going to throw me out because one homeowner doesn't like me?" "Not just one," Cynthia Lopez said, standing from the back. Her voice shook slightly, but she pushed through. "You've bullied people for years, Claudine. I was fined because my teenage son left his basketball hoop in the driveway for 2 days. You threatened to sue the Garcias over a swing set. You've treated us like subjects instead of neighbors." Others joined in. Janice McMillan stood and nodded firmly. "You fined me for hanging a holiday wreath too early in November. You embarrassed me in front of my kids' voices layered over each other, residents finally unburdening themselves. One after another, they told stories of Claudine's overreach, her petty punishments, her abuse of power. For the first time, she didn't look like a leader. She looked cornered. The board president, a quiet man named Robert Larkin, cleared his throat. "It's evident that the confidence of this community has been severely damaged. As per HOA bylaws, we can call a vote to remove the current president." A hush fell over the room. Claudine's eyes widened. "You can't do this! I built this neighborhood. Without me, it'll fall apart." Adrienne rose slowly, addressing not Claudine but the crowd. "This neighborhood doesn't need control. It needs community. It needs fairness. We all came here to live in peace, not fear." The applause that followed wasn't raucous, but steady and insistent, like the release of pressure that had been building for years. Claudine slammed her binder shut, her hands trembling. "This is a witch hunt," she hissed. "You'll regret it when this place turns into chaos." But her words carried no weight anymore. The vote was swift. Out of more than 50 households represented, only 3 voted in her favor. The rest voted her out. Robert looked down the table, then back to the residents. "The motion passes. Effective immediately, Mrs. Hensley is removed from her position as HOA president." The room erupted, not with cheers, but with relieved chatter. Some hugged, some simply exhaled. Adrienne remained seated, watching Claudine gather her things. For a moment, their eyes met. Claudine's glare held nothing but resentment, but Adrienne didn't flinch. She offered no victory smirk, no words of triumph. She simply looked back with the same calm she had carried all along. When Claudine stormed out, the door slamming behind her, the clubhouse seemed to breathe for the first time in years. People turned to Adrienne, some thanking her, others just offering a nod of acknowledgement. Martin leaned toward her as the crowd dispersed. "You know," he said quietly, "you didn't just stand up for yourself. You stood up for all of us." Adrienne gave a small smile. Sometimes all it takes is one person saying enough. The rest was already waiting to happen. But Adrienne also knew this wasn't the end of the story. Removing Claudine from her post was a victory, yes, but the true lesson hadn't yet been spoken aloud, and it would matter more than any vote. The night after the vote, the neighborhood felt different. There was no parade, no grand celebration, but there was a lightness in the air that hadn't been there before. People lingered outside a little longer, conversations carried laughter instead of whispers, and kids darted down sidewalks without parents glancing nervously at their watches. The weight of Claudine's rule had lifted, even if the scars of her leadership were still fresh. Adrienne sat on her porch with a glass of iced tea, watching the sun dip behind the rooftops. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to exhale fully. She wasn't naive enough to think the problems were over. Claudine's pride and anger wouldn't vanish overnight. But she knew something had shifted. The community had spoken, and it had chosen fairness over fear. Her daughter Kendra padded out in socks, curling up beside her. "Mom," she asked softly, "why didn't you just fight her? You could have, right?" Adrienne smiled faintly, brushing a curl from Kendra's forehead. "Yes, I could have. But fighting her wouldn't have solved anything. She wanted me to lose control so she could say I was the problem. The strongest thing I could do was stay calm." Kendra tilted her head, thinking it over. "So being strong doesn't mean hitting back?" "No," Adrienne said, her voice firm but gentle. "Being strong means choosing not to when you don't have to. Strength isn't about what you can do to someone else. It's about what you can stop yourself from doing." Across the street, Gerald waved from his porch. Cynthia strolled by with her dog, offering Adrienne a smile that carried genuine gratitude. For years, people had lived under Claudine's thumb, complaining in private but too afraid to act. Adrienne had shown them another way. Not through violence, not through screaming, but through dignity. Later that week, a local reporter asked Adrienne if she had any comment about becoming the calm woman who stood up to the HOA president. Adrienne chuckled softly at the title. "I'm not a hero," she said. "I'm just someone who refused to be intimidated. The truth is, anyone can do that. Sometimes it just takes one person going first for others to find their voice." Her words resonated far beyond the neighborhood. Online forums debated the role of HOAS in American life. Podcasts discussed the balance between authority and abuse. Parents shared the videos with their kids as examples of handling conflict without violence. Adrienne's story had become a mirror, showing people the cost of unchecked power and the value of self-control. Claudine, on the other hand, retreated from view. Rumors spread that she was considering selling her house, moving closer to her sister in Wichita. Others claimed she was threatening lawsuits, though no papers ever arrived. For Adrienne, none of it mattered anymore. Claudine's reign was finished. One evening, as Adrienne watered her tulips, the same flowers that had sparked so much tension, Trevor walked by with his young daughter. He stopped, gesturing at the bright blooms. "Funny how these flowers became the line in the sand," he said. Adrienne laughed softly. "They're just tulips, but sometimes the little things reveal the big truths." Trevor nodded. "You know, you taught us something. We all complained about Claudine, but we were scared of her. You showed us that fear only works if we let it." Adrienne smiled. "Fear is powerful, but respect lasts longer." That night, sitting with her kids at the dinner table, Adrienne shared the lesson she hoped they'd carry forever. Life will always have people like Claudine. People who use rules or power to push others down. But you don't have to match their anger. Real strength is quiet. It's patient. It's the ability to hold yourself steady when someone is trying to knock you off balance. Her son Jordan grinned. Like karate, huh? Adrian raised an eyebrow playfully. Exactly like karate. The story of Adrian Colton and Claudine Hensley wasn't about eggs, fines, or even an HOA. It was about the choice every person faces when confronted with injustice: to shrink, to lash out, or to stand tall with dignity. Adrian chose the last, and in doing so reminded her community and thousands of strangers watching online that calm resolve can be louder than chaos. And maybe that's the takeaway for all of us. Rules and authority matter, but they mean nothing without fairness. Anger might win the moment, but self-control wins the future. So if you've made it this far into Adrian's story, remember this: